An Israeli government spokesperson, Eylon Levy, and he joins me now live from Tel Aviv. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me on the show.
We've heard in the last hour or so from the IDF Chief of Staff that, quote, "We will enter the Gaza Strip, will embark on an operational and professional task to destroy Hamas operatives and infrastructure." Given we've had that statement today, there's been much speculation about whether or not a ground offensive is imminent. Can we interpret from that that something will happen in the next 24 to 48 hours?
I'm not going to speculate on our precise troop movements and obviously not give away on CNN when our forces are going in for the next stage of our campaign to destroy Hamas, but it is coming soon. Israel has made a strategic decision in the wake of the October 7th massacre, which murdered over 1,400 of our people with 210 hostages still in the Gaza Strip, that we are going to dismantle Hamas. Our goal is victory, total victory against Hamas. And for that, the whole country is getting prepared for what is going to be a very difficult and grueling and long period ahead. And unfortunately, we as a country have realized we simply have no choice but to totally dismantle the terror organization that perpetrated the atrocities of the 7th of October. We simply cannot, as a people, as a country, allow ourselves to live next to this ISIS-style terror state another day longer.
How does the protection of the Israelis who remain as hostages in Gaza apply to your military planning?
The safety of the hostages in the Gaza Strip is an absolute priority for us, and we are demanding their immediate and unconditional return. We're demanding that they be given access to the International Red Cross, and we will do whatever is necessary to bring them back. Just a word on the numbers. We have confirmed that there are, at the moment, at least 210 Israeli hostages inside the Gaza Strip. And I say at least 210 because 2 weeks on from the October 7th massacre, there are still between 100 and 200 people who are still missing. And that's because we don't know whether Hamas abducted them from their beds or simply turned them into the sort of human ash the world hasn't seen since the Holocaust. Because in the October 7th massacre, Hamas cremated whole families alive. It invaded villages and used thermobaric weapons. And I remember your own reports on CNN describing them as the most terrifying weapons in the world after nuclear weapons. They used those weapons to burn whole families inside their homes. So there are still 100 to 200 people who are still missing, and we don't know whether they're in the Gaza Strip. We don't know whether they've simply been burned to a cinder and charcoal. And that's part of the challenge now as we try to set about freeing those hostages. Part of the last 2 weeks has been trying to identify who exactly is in the Gaza Strip, because the only information we have about our hostages is from the gruesome videos that Hamas has been releasing on Telegram, revealing their horrible, horrible, awful fate inside the Gaza Strip.
Will you hold off on the ground invasion until the hostages are released? Because hostages were released yesterday, and it seems that Hamas would be less likely to concur with mediation and release hostages once you launch a ground invasion. How does that play into your calculus?
We are demanding their immediate and unconditional return, but we know exactly the sort of terrorist organization that we are dealing with and know that it doesn't have a fiber of humanitarian sentiment in its body. This is an organization that beheaded people, that committed brutal acts of rape, that burned whole families alive, that mutilated and dismembered children, gouged eyes out, murdered children in front of their parents, murdered parents in front of their children, committed atrocities that are so bad that I know some of the international media who have been reporting this are freely admitting that they can't possibly share all the gruesome details on television because it simply cannot be repeated on television. So we know the enemy that we are dealing with. We know that it is an evil organization worse than ISIS, and that's the organization we are committed to defeating and destroying and bringing our hostages home, and destroying it, by the way, so that it can never again perpetrate such atrocities and never again harm a single hair on an Israeli civilian or take another civilian hostage or any hostage back into the Gaza Strip ever again. We simply will not allow it.
We've also heard from the IDF today that you are to deepen your attacks to minimize damage to your forces when you do enter Gaza. I imagine that would be met with huge fear and concern within Gaza, given that around 4,500 civilians have already been killed as a result of Israeli airstrikes.
First of all, I would say to treat with extreme caution all the numbers that are being reported by the Hamas Health Ministry. these numbers have not been independently verified. These are numbers that Hamas is spouting out. And I'm old enough to remember just a few days ago when Hamas immediately claimed 500 to 800 people were killed in an Israeli airstrike on a hospital. And it turned out there was no airstrike. The hospital wasn't bombed and the death toll was considerably lower. So first of all, let's treat with extreme skepticism what Hamas is claiming. We know that it is waging a war of misinformation in order to gain international sympathy through the media, and we should treat that with all caution. Now, of course, while minimizing threats to our own forces, these are our children who are conscripted at the age of 18 and going into the army to protect their people. I can say personally, I have many friends who are doing reserves now because they've simply been ripped away from their ordinary lives to guard our borders. We will, of course, continue doing whatever is necessary to minimize civilian casualties inside the Gaza Strip, because we don't want more people to be hurt. That's why Israel has been encouraging civilians to temporarily evacuate for their own safety the areas that are going to see especially fierce fighting, the areas where Hamas has embedded its terrorist infrastructure underneath civilian areas. And it's regrettable that Hamas has been stopping them from evacuating them, stopping them from getting out. And there was an interview with Khaled Mashal just the other day on Al Arabiya in which he said, you know, we're willing to sacrifice our people for the cause of jihad. Now, we don't want people to be hurt. That's why we are doing everything that we can to get civilians out of harm's way. But at the end of the day, Hamas, the terror regime backed by Iran, has ultimate responsibility inside the Gaza Strip. It's been the government there for 16 years. And this is just part of the horrible, horrible conditions that we're having to deal with as we advance with this campaign to destroy Hamas, the organization that perpetrated that massacre on the 7th of October, the worst terror attack in world history after 9/11, because we have no choice. There simply is no way for Israel to continue living alongside such an evil terrorist organization.
If you don't want people in Gaza to be hurt, apart from the very direct and immediate threat of airstrikes, there is, of course, the humanitarian crisis. Now, 20 trucks have entered with humanitarian aid. You and I and everyone knows that's nowhere near enough. Can you give us an update on when further humanitarian aid will be allowed in?
So the humanitarian aid that has been going in is through the border between Egypt and Gaza, the Rafah border crossing, for a range of legal, operational, moral reasons. That is the correct entry point. And we want to see more humanitarian aid reach the people of Gaza. And we're hopeful that if what happened today is successful, that will be a model for things to come, for more aid to reach the people of Gaza through that crossing. Now, we have only one condition, that aid not reach Hamas. That is our demand and our right under international law. In fact, it would be internationally unlawful to allow international aid, international taxpayer dollars to reach the terrorist organization that perpetrated the October 7th massacre. We already know just a few days ago, Hamas stole 24,000 liters of fuel from UNRWA. Fuel that was supposed to go towards hospital generators is now being used in order to fire rockets at our cities. And we know that Hamas is going to try to steal international aid that is supposed to go to the people of Gaza. And that's why we are demanding, and we're being absolutely clear, aid for the citizens of Gaza. That is good. That is absolutely fine. That is absolutely all right. And that is to be welcomed, but not aid that is going to be diverted towards Hamas's death machine so that it can continue to perpetrate atrocities like the ones we saw on the 7th of October.
Eylon Levy, thank you for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thank you very much for having me on.